Hi everyone, I am Justine Froelker, and I am going to talk about today what it means to wholeheartedly thrive through, but especially for us here, after our infertility and loss journey, or what it's like, or how to thrive in childless, not by choice, right? So a little bit about me. I am a best-selling author, I'm a speaker, I am a certified Daring Way facilitator, which I'm a mental health therapist with 18 years of practice, and I have been trained with Dr. Brene Brown. She's a shame and vulnerability researcher, and her work has greatly influenced my advocacy in the infertility and loss and thereafter community. And so for those of you who did not see my shame teach, I had 2 back surgeries in high school. I spent a year of my life in a body cast, and because of that, it was never really recommended that I try to carry a pregnancy. And so my husband and I did gestational surrogacy, and it did not work. I am the author of Ever Upward and the mother of Second Chances, which is my blog book, and I have a new book coming out called The Complicated Gray, hopefully soon. And my story's hard, like all of our stories, right? And so today, what I'm going to share with you is really some of these pieces of wholehearted advocacy and living that I have found to be imperative in our community, especially. And so I'm literally just going to talk about the different concepts that I teach about and write about and share. So the first being loss is loss. And this is such a huge concept for our community. I am frankly quite over comparison. Hard is just hard. Struggle is struggle. And loss is loss. I don't really care for how many years you tried, or how much money you spent, or how long you waited, or whatever. I do care about the babies that you lost. Those are our lives, and those are our children. I lost 3. So often in our community, we get tripped up in comparison and competition and the numbers game. Like you get a freaking award for trying for more years than the person sitting next to you. This concept really shattered my lens when I was working with a client years ago at this point, and she had lost her 17-year-old daughter in a police pursuit chase. So her daughter was an innocent victim. And she looked at me one day in session and she said, is it better that I got 17 years with mine, or better that you never even got to meet yours? And I took a breath with tears in my eyes, and I said, what if instead we just looked at each other like mothers who have lost their children? Because then we don't have to be so damn alone in it. When we compare our losses, or we play the pain Olympics, we're alone. And God, I already feel alone. I already feel alone. As a 38-year-old woman who can't have kids, I am almost always the only one everywhere I go. I already feel alone. And then when my own community compares their stories to mine, that theirs is harder, how is that moving us forward? How is that helpful? How is that creating connection? It doesn't. It just leaves us both more broken and alone. And healing will never take place in disconnection. We must stop comparing our stories. How do we do this? We have to speak our truth. If you didn't catch my vulnerability shame training, please go back and watch that. But we have to start talking about our stories. We have to share them from a place of authentic wholeheartedness that is aligned with our values. We must ask for what we want and need, and we must even give the script to our loved ones, especially, and even to our society. If we are not sharing our stories in an authentic, vulnerable way, we can never expect compassion and empathy to grow. It just won't happen. And we cannot keep waving our hands and jumping up and down saying we are misunderstood or not seen and loved by our society when we are not speaking our stories, and when we are not telling our truths, and when we are not asking for what we want and need. Our stories are difficult to understand. We have to speak them. We have to give people the words, tell them what we need, so that they can offer us the compassion and the empathy that we all yearn for and that we all deserve. This does not mean that they will give it to us perfectly, because again, we are flawed, imperfect human beings. So we cannot expect everyone to get it right. We're going to screw it up. We also have to remember that someone's response to us is more about them than it is about you, us. My response to you is more about me than it is about you. My second TED Talk was about this. It's called The Donut Effect. A random and hilarious story that got me to that lesson. When I talk about building and getting more compassion from our society and our loved ones, it means that we must know what the difference is between empathy and sympathy. And God has gifted me with this incredible and difficult story to use to teach everyone the difference between empathy and sympathy. And when it comes to the infertility, loss, and childlessness, not by choice community, the empathy versus sympathy component is huge. So sympathy, I feel for you. It's disconnection. Sympathy is what we are all trained to think that we should give, and all trained to even think that we want to receive. What's the first words that you hear from someone when you have lost a loved one, baby or grandparent, whatever? I'm so sorry for your loss. What'd you do? You didn't do anything wrong. I'm so sorry is a polite response. It's what we've been socialized and told that we're supposed to do. And yet the more work I do with Brene Brown and the more work I do in our community, I realize just how stark the difference is between empathy and sympathy. So sympathy, I feel for you. Empathy, I feel with you. Empathy is connection. Empathy requires us to get vulnerable. So the best example is myself. I'm a 38-year-old woman who wanted to have kids but can't. What is the first question I am asked almost everywhere I go, as I am sure it is one of the first questions you are asked also? How many kids do you have? To which I am an advocate. So I speak my story and my truth all of the time. Plus I am a believer in breaking the silence and the shame that we have in our community. And so I will answer, we can't have kids. We tried really, really hard, but we live what I call a child-full life, which means that we find lots of other ways to parent. What are the common responses I get to that answer? There's usually two. Why don't you just adopt? Or try another round? Or, I'm so sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. So number one, why don't you just adopt? Or try another round? It's a quick fix. My pain makes them very uncomfortable. And most of us aren't signing up to be vulnerable. So rather than get vulnerable, they offer me what they think is a quick fix in adoption or in trying another round. Or the other response, oh, I'm so sorry, you poor thing. I just can't imagine. They think that's a response that is proper, is polite, is kind. I just can't imagine. Shane quickly writes that story as, you're really alone and no one gets you. Both of those responses, a quick fix and sympathy, makes me feel alone. And I'm already alone enough as a woman who can't have kids who wanted them. What if instead we taught people about empathy and we asked for it and we said, like, what would it be like for you to say, like, that just really sucks? Because it does. Because it's sad. And I'm okay. For people to give empathy back, they have to be willing to get vulnerable. They have to be able to identify with the emotions that I must feel as a woman who cannot have kids. This is what trips most people up. They think that they cannot identify with the emotions that I have because they have kids, because they've never struggled with loss or with infertility. But here's the deal. Every person has dealt with loss. Every person has grief and anger and bitterness. You only must identify with the emotions that underlie the human experience. You don't have to have had the same human experience to know what it must feel like to be in my shoes and to give me empathy of I feel with you. That sucks. We know that empathy is infinite, and we know that it's healing. So the next time someone tries to fix your pain quickly or gives you sympathy, what would it be like for you to have the courage to say, I know it's a sad story. I know it's a hard story. What would it be like for you to sit with me in my pain? Just sit beside me. Not try to fix it, because it's hard. And I'm not gonna try to fix your pain either. What if instead we sat beside one another and said, this sucks. I'm here. Again, like I talked about in my first training, this requires us to be vulnerable, to ask for what we want and need. So that vulnerability piece, again, you can go back to my other teach for that. What is vulnerability? How'd you grow up believing it was? Things like that. One of the other pieces, so I shared a lot from the curriculum on shame and vulnerability in my first teach. I would like to share a little bit of the grief session that we have in the Rising Strong component, or Rising Strong curriculum also. So, grief. What a tricky son of a bitch. My therapy Thursday on grief went viral for me, for sure. And I'll talk about that in a little while after I talk about Brené's research on grief. So Brené Brown's research on grief and the actual curriculum from the Rising Strong curriculum that we do is she talks about how grief has three main components. Number one, that grief will include loss. So like something we counted on is not there. Something we believed in or wanted is gone. There's an actual hole. There's a loss. Then there's also longing, like this involuntary yearning for wholeness, for understanding, this longing for what they would have been like, for what I would have been like as their mother. And then there's also this sense of feeling lost. Like we must reorient ourselves, which means changes in our identity. And I think so much of us in the infertility and loss and childlessness, not by choice community, we've got the loss down. We know what that is. We know what's missing. We know what the hole is. We even know what the longing is. We have the wonders. We have the due dates. We have the anniversaries. We have those wonders. But what most of us are not doing in this work is really feeling the lostness. To be able to admit and say, I don't know what my life looks like after this journey ends, after I accept that I'm going to have to live my life without children here on this earth, that I'm going to have to figure out who I am as not a mother in the traditional sense of the word. We have to reorient ourselves. What do I look like? Who do I want to be? What is this path? Are you doing that work in your grief process? You also have to realize that grief is lifelong. Screw the 5 steps of grief. They happen out of order, they repeat themselves, and then they go away, and then they come back, and it's just really complicated. I love Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I love grief research, but there's a lot of work on grief that needs to be done. Your grief will look very different. They'll look different than your partners, than your parents who are also grieving. Like than your friends who are grieving, that you are not alone in your grief. And the minute that you think that you are in this journey is the minute that you are becoming way too egocentric and you are choosing to be alone because you are surrounded by the people who love you, who are also grieving you in this journey. And if you are not turning towards them and you are turning away from them, you are only harming yourself and the relationship. We must, especially when it comes to our partners, we must realize that our grief path is very different. We are not on the same road. We are on 2 different roads. And our job is to turn towards one another and not away from one another, and to look over and be like, are you doing okay over there? How are you doing in this grief? Because I am struggling. Like, I need some help. Will you help me? You reach over and grab their hand, and you make sure that you're both moving forward on your path of grief, so that you know that your paths are at least running parallel, and at sometimes will cross each other, and you'll be in the same place at the same time once in a while, probably not often. But when you turn towards one another and you do this work, you will know that you are not going to have paths that are veering the opposite. It is true that couples who lose babies and couples who end this journey without kids, their rate of divorce will be much higher, because they are not doing this work together and separately. They are not turning towards one another, but rather away. They are rumbling with their own grief on their own, rather than together and at the same time separate. The other piece about grief is that, yep, it's true. It's like an ocean. And what I have learned through this journey is that it looks different for everyone. This metaphor is huge when it comes to grief. Number one, we will all have it. None of us have lives that have turned out the way we hoped, dreamed, and planned. None of us get out of this life unscathed. In my first TED Talk, The Permission of the End, I tell my own story, and I talk about how if we rumble with this life and we walk into our grief, we can see, the glory of it. And we all have it. So don't you dare for 1 second say you are alone in it, because you are not. We are all sitting on that surfboard in the ocean of life, watching the horizon. We know when the wave might be coming, or we think it might be coming, or we're guessing. And every surfer might paddle out at the same time. But none of them catch the wave the same. There will be some waves of grief that you have to jump off the board, because it's just that big and you get beat to hell by the wave. There are some waves of grief that you ride that baby all the way into the shoreline. You use it as a gift. It feels good. You recycle it. You serve others. There will be other waves that you literally jump off the board willingly and let the wave overcome you. Sometimes we stay down and pretend like we're drowning in 3 feet of water. Sometimes we pick up the surfboard and bash the wave as if that's going to stop it from coming. What if instead you rumbled with your grief? What if instead you felt your emotion, you identified it correctly, you coped with it in a healthy and effective way, and you got your ass back up on that surfboard to ride the next wave, because it's going to come. Because that's grief. And when you do the work, it is a true gift. And if you have a major revolting reaction to when I say that, you have much work to do. Join me. God gifted me my 3 babies, and he took them away. And that was a gift too. And I am not a puppet in this world, so I still had to choose him and choose to do the work. And here I am, the best version of myself. So how do you cope? So a couple things that we talk about in the curriculum. Permission slips. So give yourself permission. Mostly we just need to give ourselves permission to freaking feel. Give yourself permission to struggle. I give myself permission to feel this. Permission to feel is not the same as sitting in it. Don't sit in the shit. That's not helpful. Give yourself permission to feel it, and then cope with it. Cope in a healthy and effective way. And for God's sake, start practicing some freaking self-care by now, which that's my live teach. If you didn't see that, please check it out. Self-care dug me out of my deep, dark hole of grief. It saved my life. Morning routine, nighttime routine, fill yourself up so that you are not just a shell of who you once were, and especially so that you can serve and love people, and especially love yourself. When it comes to some of the other messages that I talk about in our community is just, not being our numbers, not being our journey, speaking our story out loud, standing our sacred truth, owning all the parts of our story, knowing what your enoughs and everythings are, which at this point we have all probably done that at this point. How far are you willing to go? How much money are you willing to spend? How many losses can you endure? Whatever, like, what is your enough and everything that you have to put a stake in the ground, as bittersweet as it may be, and say, we are going to work on active acceptance, which does not mean that I'm necessarily okay with that, but it means I'm going to do the work to do that. Active acceptance is the acceptance of what is, and still choosing to do the work of what is in my control to make it work for me and not against me. To make it a gift and not a bitter ass bomb that went off in my life and destroyed it. Again, we will all have traumas, losses, and tragedies in our lives. It is our choice if we do the work to make it a gift. We have to stop saying things like never give up in our community. Never give up on yourself. You know what is your truth. We have to have a definition of hope that is healthier. For me, my hope is in my faith in Jesus. And I came to my faith after our infertility journey, failed infertility journey. So good God, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But you got to have faith in something. Life is just too damn hard not to. We must give ourselves permission to feel it all at the same time, which is what I call the permission of the and, or the complicated gray. That is my first TED Talk. And what I have been learning in this journey since my TED Talk is that the permission of the and, to give myself permission to walk into the muck and the mess of the longing and joy, the anger and acceptance, the dark and the light, is that this is a miracle of a tool in my life to have risen strong from the ashes of my failed infertility journey to rewrite my story. And what I am learning now is that it is a tool and not a place to stay stuck. I give myself permission to feel all the feels, even all at the same time, because it is there that my magic and my clarity lie. And it is there that I have the wherewithal, the gumption, the faith to choose the gift. Your story is not sadder than anybody else's story. We all have our stuff. Just some of us choose to use it to serve others and change the world, and to be happy. I hope this was helpful. It's a lot to put in one teach, and the stuff that I teach is pretty heavy. So to go 45 minutes is just simply asking too much for the watcher. That's also why on my YouTube channel, all the videos are, 3 to 8 minutes. The work of owning your shame, rewriting your stories, practicing vulnerability and self-care takes some discipline, risk, trust, and faith. And it will be the single best thing you will ever have done in your life. I am a walking miracle of that. Thank you for being here. I would love to see you on social media. You can find me at any of the platforms, Justine Froelker. And my website is justinefroelker.com. Thank you so much.